Welcome to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast, where the goal is to improve organizations and serve students one leader at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Yoakum. If you're a department chair in higher education or any type of educational leader, and you want to improve yourself to better serve and influence those you lead, you've come to the right place, because the best way to improve an organization is to improve its leader. Let's get started. Well, hello and welcome back, everybody. As always, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to better serve your organization and those you serve by developing yourself as a leader. Today, I'm very excited for our guest, Hiedi Bauer. She's coming to us from Lower Columbia College in Longview, Washington. Some of you may remember hearing about that. A previous guest, Dr. Matt Seamers, is the president up there, and what a great compliment to Hiedi that he reached out and said, you need to have her on the Chair podcast because she will add value to others. Real quick, I want you to know about Hiedi's background here. As I said, she's an instructor of English at Lower Columbia College in Longview, Washington. She's been in that role since 2006 and has been tenured since 2013. She has served as chair of the Language and Literature Department for nearly as long. She teaches composition, American literature, and French culture, and has had her poetry and narrative nonfiction published in several literary arts magazines. Hiedi has received Washington State's Sue Ann McNeil Award for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, has attended the ACE Leadership Academy for Department Chairs in Washington, D.C., She has studied the American Transcendentalist in Concord through a National Endowment for the Humanities program and is currently on the wait list for Community College France's program for study in renewable energy and post-colonial culture in Antigua. So Hiedi, you are busy doing a lot of things, but first and foremost, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Chris. Thank you. And I'm very happy to be here.
Well, so happy to have you here. We were just talking before we started. There are so many levels of leadership and so many flavors and nuances in higher ed, and be it a four-year, a private four-year, a community college. And I'm really excited for you to be on for our listeners because you bring yet another perspective to the department chair. Obviously, a very, very successful faculty member, again, instructor of English, and now you chair language and literature, obviously an active scholar, doing a lot of great things. And I just wanted our listeners to get your perspective and maybe hear a little bit about your leadership journey. So why don't we just start there? Why don't you talk a little bit about how did you get to your current position as the chair at Lower Columbia College?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I think that one theme that I'm learning across chairs is we're often reluctant leaders. Something happened where we were thrust into this position and there we are. So I was newly tenured, and Joan Herman, who was the chair at the time, a wonderful human being, and she was on my tenure committee. She was retiring and she asked me to put my name forward for chair. And in our department, it's the chair is a 3-year cycle, and you're elected by the department. So it didn't necessarily feel much like an honor generally, because in a lot of the departments at LCC, if you're the newest faculty member, then it's like it's your turn, and they're like, not me. But Joan wanted me to be chair, and for her, it felt like it was an honor, which made it, I think, terrifying. So I was newly tenured. I was a very young woman. And at Lower Columbia College, what a chair is probably looks different than it does in other places. We have very little power. We get a stipend every term, and we negotiate between the faculty and the administration. So we set the schedule, and we are involved in hiring decisions for adjunct faculty. But our formal role is very limited in our faculty contract. We're a college with a strong union, and so most of what we do is dictated by our faculty contract, our policies. So I had to really take that role once I had it and figure out what that looked like, which was really terrifying because I hadn't really been in a leadership position before than being faculty, and I hadn't seen women in leadership positions before. Like Matt mentioned in his podcast, I'm also a first generation college student. My dad was a worker at a mill in the town that Longview, in the town that the college is, and my mom was a stay at home mom. So I didn't know what formal leadership looked like. I didn't know how to be in charge of a group of really smart and articulate people. Uh, our dean at the time turned me on to this opportunity to go to the ACE Academy for Leadership in DC. And there were a couple of lessons from that really helped along the way. One was that, find my notes here, that that a chair develops a shared vision, right? So you work with your department to create and articulate a shared vision for where you want to go. Another thing that Another takeaway from that academy is to ask the department, what do you want in a leader? And they gave us a long list of criteria that we could ask about. But that was really exciting to me because one of the things that as a new leader I thought I had to do was to have all the answers and to be able to fix all of the problems. And I think one of my lifelong lessons that I'm learning is nobody really has that. Nobody really has the answers to all of the problems. And when you're confronting something for the first time that nobody else has been able to solve, you feel like you have to solve that thing. So asking the department what they wanted in a chair was a really useful way for me to wrap my mind around not only how to be a good leader, but how to be a good leader in that department. The last lesson they gave was to celebrate successes because we tend to job done, moving on to the next thing, and we never really get a chance to celebrate. So I think that was a long time ago, but two of the things that I've really retained from that, well, the three of the things really, is to listen all the time and not just to what people say, because sometimes what they don't say or where they don't show up or the email they don't answer is just as important as what they are saying. So listen really, really deeply and all the time. I think that consensus building is a byproduct of that. But in terms of developing the shared vision, building that consensus, which can only happen if you have a deep knowledge of the people in your department, is the second takeaway that I have developed over a long period of time. Probably that sounded not very articulate. And the last one, in terms of celebrating successes, is to bring that element of positivity to remind people that you like their ideas. And some of that comes from my rhetorical training as an English teacher more than my training as a leader, because we're thinking about writing and writers, student writers especially, are insecure about the quality of their product. It's a very deeply personal thing that you are sharing. And so responding to that writing is about much more than correcting what is wrong. Being a leader is about much more than is correcting what is wrong. I find that you can enhance your success and reduce conflict if you consistently remember along the way to elevate, share, and celebrate the successes that you see, the good ideas that you see as you go.
I'm just going to repeat that back because I want to make sure I got that at the end. Elevate, share, and celebrate. I like that. I love that. So much to unpack there, Heidi. One thing that you said, obviously people listening they're gonna want to take notes on that. They'll want to rewind or whatever you do on the podcast. But you mentioned something that I like to touch on with leaders, certainly in higher education. We all start with a specialty, a content area of focus. And I think if we take the right approach, every discipline on a campus has something that we can pull from that will make us a better leader. And you touched on it. What are some things that you have found in your background You said, and you mentioned one of them was related to rhetorical theory. What are some things that you have found that have helped you with your training as an academic, as a chair? We might have someone listening who also is in an English department, language department, something similar. Anything that you'd like to share on that?
So you mentioned rhetorical knowledge, and I think that that is at the heart of one of my strengths as somebody who studied the discipline of English and also teaches that discipline. For thinking about the rhetorical situation, that's author purpose audience. If you're me, it's speaker purpose audience. If you're one of those public speaking instructors, and especially in the type of position that I'm in, I'm navigating between many different audiences. Most directly, it's administration, so deans, vice presidents, to a certain extent, the president, and then the faculty. And because my position, it doesn't come with release time, it comes with a stipend, I'm still teaching a full load, I'm primarily faculty. So I'm wearing both hats quite simultaneously. So, for example, when we're writing policy, I find that I have an especial skill in being able to see a policy from both perspectives. And I always tell the administration when I'm giving suggestions, I know that we understand what we're saying here and what this means. But imagine we've hired future evil dean, and future evil dean can interpret the policy this way. So considering your audience, not wanting to insult your audience or alienate your audience, but still trying to get everybody on the same page so that the purpose of what you're trying to achieve is achieved. So that deeper rhetorical knowledge really helps me move back and forth between administration and faculty. And that liking is something that I do. It's by default now. It's something that I do constantly in meetings. And it's developed for me a reputation for being a very positive person, which is nice because I tend to talk a little bit more than I'd like to in meetings. And I think that kind of helps soften the impact of my verbosity.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I learned something about your discipline, and obviously, you have to be effective communicator as a leader. There are many ways to be a good communicator, and I also want to go back because you mentioned at the outset that your current role, that you are a faculty member, you were somewhat of a reluctant leader, which we hear a lot of times. I think before we got on, you said you might not have as many options or tools in the toolkit as other chairs. I think though, in some ways, that really focuses people in your position to really use their influence and their leadership skills, because you said you don't have disciplinary action over faculty members, but nonetheless, you still have to influence in and gain consensus. Not that I agree with a micromanaging approach, but let's be honest, sometimes just the threat of somebody having the heavy hand is, let's be honest, they're the boss, and sometimes you just have to do things because they're the boss. So what I'm getting at really, Heidi, and I think listeners will agree that it's very complimentary, because anyone that, if what Heidi explained about her role resonates with your role, please know I think those roles are harder to be influential in, because it's all through influence and relationships. Now, that's great leadership no matter what. But have you, I mean, and you can tell me I'm wrong. I've been in higher ed long enough. I'm used to people telling me I'm wrong and having different opinions. But have you found that, and I mean that as a compliment, but have you found that maybe your position, you have to enhance and work on some of those influential and relational skills because you maybe don't have the other options in your job description?
I do. The work that I've done towards team building and consensus building has taken years. And that's a delicate place to be in for a separate reason. And then I'll circle back to that consensus building. Because when I served on the board of our neighborhood association, and I live in Portland, Oregon, and it was the board of the neighborhood association there, the person who onboarded me had a very specific leadership philosophy that I was drawn to, but also conflicted by. He says you want to be on the board for 3 years, 1 year to learn the job, 1 year to do the job, and 1 year to train the next person. And so my term of service is for 3 years and we elect. And every time my term of service comes up again, I always offer to the department, this is your chance. I do not feel stuck to this position at all. I will happily give it up to the next person who wants to take it on. You'll do
Hmm.
something different from me, and that's to be celebrated. And so far, all that's done is cause panic, which has been flattering. I don't want to be hooked on that feeling because I think it's important that people feel comfortable in taking over the position and that the position rotates. I think that that's much more healthy. But when I was talking about some of these efforts taking years, that's a very uncomfortable place to be in when you're never quite sure, and you shouldn't be sure how long your term of service is going to last. So it's incredibly hard. But two of the things that I've found that have worked really well, at least with our department, one was it comes from improv, and I learned it at a different conference. And it was actually a teaching strategy that we were taught. And it's just a question of yes and. So apparently in improv, whatever situation you get, you always respond with yes and, and then you continue with whatever the thing is. So we practiced that as a department, that exercise. I think it was put together a picnic, and whatever somebody's suggestion is, you have to yes and it. And we still use it jokingly. Whenever we disagree, somebody will say yes and then I'll laugh because they're about to disagree with somebody. But it's so friendly and so positive, and it's opened up channels of communication and reduced unnecessary conflict in a way that has been really validating. But I think that leadership, like teaching, is a lot like a science experiment. You try something, and if it works, you keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. And all of that takes time, which I think when you're being less authoritarian, you need more time to build these relationships. We've also done a lot of ice breaking, get to know you activities within our department, which also take time. And that can feel risky because you're taking the time away from quote unquote real business. If we are doing improv exercises or get to know you quizzes, we're not re examining course objectives. We're not doing assessment work. We're not um, writing position descriptions for the next position we want to hire. We're not grading papers, right? There's a lot of work that has to be done, and this can feel too fun and fluffy. But what happened when we were doing these types of get to know you activities early on in the department, there was a lot of conflict because there were a lot of personalities that were just big personalities that didn't get along.
Hmm.
And the atmosphere was a lot less healthy than it should be, I would argue. By getting to know each other, so for example, there's a quiz called an energy styles quiz where you learn that you're either somebody who gets energy in group settings by brainstorming, or maybe you get energy in group settings by connecting people, or maybe by analyzing, or maybe by finishing, by concluding. So those are the four
Hmm.
styles. Once we learned what our styles were, things that used to be conflicts became strengths. So, for example, we have a person in our department who, her words, hates to build the plane and fly it at the same time. She's a concluder. She's very goal oriented. She wants to see what the final product looks like. But for somebody who enjoys brainstorming, that can look like that person wants us to be conformists. They want us to always follow a narrow and rigid set of rules that never changes. Conversely, the synthesizers or the brainstormers, they love to put out idea after idea after idea, and there's a wonderful wave of creative energy and out of the box thinking that is necessary for growth in any organization or any group. And to a concluder, that looks like a project that will never be finished. Uh, every time you try to move in a certain direction, the synthesizer wants to break that direction. But once you know that these are just energy styles and that these represent strengths, then we can all start putting each other in positions of strengths. And we have reduced conflict because we have a greater understanding of each other, or at least we've reduced unnecessary conflict.
I really appreciate everything that you said. So many great points, Heidi. I define leadership as influence through courage, character, service, and relationships. And I think without me prompting you, you pretty much covered all of those in your style. I really like where you say we turned conflict became a strength, and I think that's so important because if those that are looking at leadership positions or maybe were reluctant and drew the short straw and became one, regardless of if they wanted to, if we said what's the one thing that really is keeping you up at night, it's probably related to conflict because that is a different thing. And the chair position is really hard because more than likely, not always, but more than likely, you already know those people and have developed relationships and you want to keep them. And so I really like how you said that you built the culture and climate that people might think, well, we need to get to the business of school, the business of the department, but leadership is a people business. People are your business, and you were developing the relationships. You work collaboratively to develop the people. As a public school teacher, I'm reminded that when I used to teach teachers methods, and there's a great book called The First Days of School that a lot of you listening in teacher ed might know, and it's all about the first days of school. It's not about if you're a math teacher, it's not about if you're a second grade teacher. It's about building expectations, routines, relationships, in some cases making sure the kids are safe. And so the teacher in me, I'm reminded of that you took the time to make the people and each other your business, to get to know them. I really like the yes and. I think that is a really good tool to get to know how to understand each other and to maybe have professional and constructive arguments. So another word, Heidi, that I always associate with leadership, and I say it's a leader superpower, is vulnerability. And listeners know that I'm a big Brene Brown fan and her work on vulnerability and leadership. What are your thoughts on vulnerability and maybe some experiences that you've had, maybe something you've learned about it? But I have a hunch. I know that you're a vulnerable leader because you're an effective leader, but anything you might like to add based upon on your experience and overall philosophy of leadership?
Sure. Vulnerability is such an interesting word because I just sent an email this morning to a department member where I was being incredibly vulnerable. We are working right now as a department to revamp some of our course objectives in one course that folks are having a hard time transferring into. And this is a person with a different energy style than me. She definitely likes to break things. And I'm trying to finish the thing. So we're coming at it from different angles. And I was feeling very stressed about this because I'm not able to fully wrap my mind around her vision. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a specific direction that I want to go. And I'm being a bit more assertive than I typically am. So that also feels scary within the context. And so the email I sent to her, I said, these are the things that are giving me anxiety. These are the things and I use these words, these are the things I don't understand. And I feel stupid. Like I feel personally dumb because I do not understand what it is that you're trying to get at. And I feel stressed. So by letting her know that, especially this idea that I don't feel smart enough to understand what it is that you're trying to present, like these were things that I was holding because it felt too vulnerable to share these things. But I realized that if I could do that within this relationship, this professional relationship where there was the safety to do these things, that we could get at a better product eventually because we'll both understand where and respectfully understand where the other person is coming from. I think that the um, I don't want to say the higher up we are in leadership, but I can't think of a better way to put it. But there's that pressure externally and internally to know the thing. And we'll never know all of the things. And to share that I don't know the thing and I feel deficient because I don't can be a very useful type of vulnerability. It can go the other way too, though. If you don't have the right kind of professional relationship, people can lose trust in you. So I think considering deeply ethos, another rhetorical appeal, your credibility, and also considering the context and the audience for when you're sharing that vulnerability is really important.
I couldn't have said it better, and I love the example that you gave, Heidi. Those of you that are listening, if you didn't take out your probably the note app on your phone nowadays, but if you didn't take what powerful, I'm going to use those to email a colleague and say, I don't understand. I'm anxious about this. You're right, because I think not only is it natural for leaders to think, well, we have to have all the answers, but then on top of that, we're in higher education where we're supposed to have all the answers. And and so it's an extra layer that we have to get through to admit I don't know something. I feel less than intelligent on this. But I think most people listening, I would say in a good way, that almost disarms somebody. Because if you come at me and say, listen, I'm stressed about this, I don't really understand this. Help me. I think it's human nature to say, oh, Heidi, let me help you with this. And I always say part of my leadership credo, you might as well admit your faults because they're going to see them whether you admit it or not. And so thank you so much for sharing those. I would encourage people, pull that out of your leadership toolbox. Just reach out in person through an email and say, I'm feeling anxious about this. Help me understand. I don't know a lot about this. A couple things here, a couple questions in, Heidi, as kind of we close out. First of all, what advice, you certainly are the epitome of somebody admittedly that started as a reluctant leader and I think became a great leader. What is your advice? Because right now, depending upon when this drops, but it will be probably the end of the spring semester, certainly before next school year, this is chair hiring or go out looking for a new chair season. Someone's going to listen to this that either will be asked to be a chair or has already been asked and they're reluctant. What's your advice to that reluctant chair, that reluctant leader?
So I'm assuming that I am giving advice to somebody who's already accepted the role, no matter how reluctantly. And I think that there are two unexpected pieces of advice. And I think that's useful because you can get a lot of expected pieces of advice, and that's wonderful. But if I could think about what I could bring that might be a little bit different, one would be I think that giving yourself time to reflect is incredibly important. And there are so many time pressures that we're all familiar with in anyways in education, whether it's, teaching or grading or all the way up through. So building in that time to reflect. I actually, when I was preparing for this podcast, I was hiking and I was just, walking and looking at trees and rocks and moss and I had listened to some of your other interviews on the drive out to the hike. So and I was just processing all of that. So building in space and time to reflect, and that actually also came out of the ACE Academy in DC, to, even if you must, put that into your calendar so that you shut the door. This is my time to sit and think and process. That doesn't necessarily work for me. Apparently I need to do it outside, but reflect and then model reflection so that you give that permission to others to do the same thing. I have an armchair in my office and I meditate in it every day after lunch. And people know that if my lights are on, the door is locked, and I'm not answering the knock, it's because I'm meditating, because I'll wander out of the office after that and be like, did you knock? I was meditating. And it's funny, but they all know that I do it. So reflecting and building in that time, I think, is so useful. And the other one is to find, I'm going to say it this way, the right role models. And for me, I was a young woman and I didn't know what female female leadership looked like. I was conditioned as a young woman to avoid directness, to avoid conflict. So how to communicate, to make decisions autonomously, to communicate those directly was so challenging for me. And I don't feel like I really learned how to do it well until my most recent dean took on the role. She's a woman. She and I are near the same age, and she's a former public speaking instructor. So she, if ever a person could model how to communicate directly, which I was identifying as my deficiency that I wanted to solve. And seeing somebody else solve the problem that you're struggling with, I think, is incredibly powerful. So finding those role models that you feel like you need because they are showing you a path forward in a place where you feel like you have a deficiency or a gap, I think is really, really valuable.
I like how you said that as somebody that can help you probably experience your struggles for women leaders and to connect just through mentoring. Really glad. I think that's you're probably learning a lot of great things from somebody that's a trained public speaker. I bet you when your dean gets up, she can control the room and does wonderful things that a lot of us wish we could do that didn't have that training. So thank you for sharing that. The self care is so important and setting boundaries. I know a few other chairs that they've just told people between this time and this time, I'm going to be at the gym working out, outside walking, because you also model that for your own people that it's okay. It's okay to say no sometimes and take time for yourself. So thank you for sharing that. The final thing, Heidi, what are some things that you're currently doing or hope to do for your own professional development as a leader, whether it will directly or indirectly make you a better leader, whether it's you're reading something, listening to something, writing something. What are you doing in hopes that it might help some of our listeners or direct them in an area that they might want to pick up that book or listen to the podcast?
So one of the things that I first mentioned was finding role models that are doing the thing that I want to be doing. I mentioned my dean. Our new vice president is also or new to me. Vice president is also a female leader who is incredibly powerful, direct, and well spoken. And that comes from I've had so many male deans and so many male vice presidents. This is two of our rare, I won't say first, but rare. So finding those mentors, I think, is really useful. I think another thing is, and I think this is good for teaching as well, but it works for leadership too, is to continually put yourself not only back in the position of a learner, but putting yourself back in the position of learning something that you don't necessarily feel like you're good at. So, for
Yeah.
example, I was a boxer for several years. And when I was a child growing up, shockingly, I was very bookish, right? I loved to read. And I'm very tall, I grew very fast. I was very awkward as a teenager, not athletic at all, was literally the last person picked for the team, that kind of thing. So going into take boxing lessons and having all of that anxiety and then looking at the person who is trying to teach me the thing that I am not comfortable with. You kind of take that hat off once you've taught, right? Looking at how and what I like about adult education, so boxing classes, yoga classes, apparently I do a lot of physical things, but thing the people signed up to be there, but they might be older than you, they might be more experienced than you, they might be more educated than whoever is leading the room. They have no reason to trust your authority. So how does the person in the front of the room navigate that and get a bunch of adults to do the thing that they want them to do? So putting yourself in those kinds of uncomfortable learning situations, I think can be really, really inspiring. And then when I think about my own professional development right now, a lot of it isn't related to leadership at all, but it impacts my ability to be a good leader. So, for example, this program in Antigua that I applied to be a part of, and I'm sitting eagerly on the wait list now, on its surface, I'm learning about post colonial French culture and renewable energy. But underneath that, I'm getting a more global perspective of what it means to I'll say lead because that's what we're talking about here. But if you're thinking about different cultures, you're also thinking about setting priorities. You're thinking about group norms. You're thinking about again what leadership style works within that context, what communication style works within that context. And I think keeping that broader view is really useful because it keeps us from being narrow minded and leading whatever group or institution we're leading in a direction that doesn't change. And especially in this more global world with this greater focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mhm.
broadening out your professional development and then taking that time to reflect on how you can become a better leader if you do that, I think is just so incredibly important.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I know that added value to listeners. So before we go, any final thoughts or comments you'd like to share with our friends that are listening, most of whom are probably some type of leadership role in education?
I think the most important takeaway is I know that we always say that we're never done growing, but I think the more that we reflect on those kinds of statements, the more we can realize that we don't have to have all the answers, that our strengths lie within our group, and the more we can listen deeply, get to know the people that we're leading, the more that we can all work together to do something really amazing.
Wonderful, Heidi. I got better today as a leader. I learned some great stuff. And with our friends listening, I want to leave you with what she said earlier is I encourage you to elevate, share, celebrate your department, your organization, the humans that you serve and work with. So again, thank you, Hiedi Bauer from Lower Columbia College. I know you're going to want to listen to this more than once, people. So many great things about equity, team building, policy, how to overcome maybe being that reluctant leader, the power of vulnerability, just all of those things that I know that you've been studying as you become great leaders yourself. So Heidi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak into our listeners, to add value to them and those they serve. And as always, friends, I thank you for taking time to make this part of your professional development. Thank you, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. If you want to learn more about my leadership philosophy and how to be an effective chair, please consider my book, The Department Chair, A Practical Guide to Effective Leadership. You can find this and learn more about me by going to cjleadership.com. Also, please be sure to like this podcast, leave a review, and share with your colleagues. Thanks again for improving your organization and those you serve by improving yourself. Take care.